So that was a whistle-stop tour of the core data standard. I'm very happy to accept any questions about its derivation, content, or anything else, as you know, because I've done 15 minutes and covered nearly 30 years of development time. So any questions, stick them in the text chat, turn your mic on and talk about it, whatever you feel comfortable with. Instant silence and lack of typing.
Sorry, hi, this is Tuğçe. Thank you so much. I also listened yesterday's talk, and I'm trying to combine all this talk in terms of the workflow. So yesterday, in the beginning of the session, you talked about the frameworks, which was created for the whole process, but it didn't work. In your opinion, and it's a huge effort to combine all these different steps and the tasks in terms of the different softwares and the different scientists. I wonder if you also have a kind of a framework or a workflow which simplifies the process of this specifically in the archaeology. Because I think it's well, I mean, for us, it's also important to understand what fails, that we can actually improve the.
Yeah. Well, in that particular case, yesterday I was talking about the problem with trying to take very different data environments and combine them together. So talking about natural history and fine art and archives and libraries. And that was the problem that was difficult to overcome, and thus why we have the conceptual reference model as part of that activity. This is far simpler in that we're dealing with the recording practice within a single domain. And consequently, I don't see this as being a problem for recording information according to the core data standard. Core data standard is very much the best of breed in terms of practice within archaeological recording at the level of national and regional inventory. That's what it's intended to guide. It doesn't work quite so well for detailed excavation recording. However, the basic principle of the 5 boxes does work. So you deal with each context being an archaeological item and each phase within your site as being an archaeological group. And you're actually following the same principles that we're laying out here, but you'd need a different set of fields to record that information in, because you're dealing with detailed excavation records, whereas this is intended to deal with regional inventory. You know, so there is a villa here, there is a granary here, there is a monastery here. It's that kind of level that we're expecting people to record with the CDS, rather than there's a pit here and there's this piece of pottery found in the edge of the pit, and there was this stone supporting this post that made up the corner of this building. The CRM extension, CRM Archeo, has that capability, but this is not it's not the aim of this particular standard to work on that level of problem. And I'm afraid if you put 10 archaeologists in a room, you'll get 20 different opinions about what you should record when you dig a hole. So it's very difficult to form a standard at that level. What the Archeo extension to the CRM does is it provides a mechanism to allow all of those different recording systems that are used at excavation level to be brought together into a single searchable integrated whole. This is intended to provide a place to as a touchstone for minimum recording practice for regional and national inventories. The archive standard, which I'm going to talk about, yes, that's freely available. Whether you'll find an up-to-date copy or not is instantly debatable, because the website's moved and I don't think anything moved with it. But if you email me, then I can send you the latest working copy. We're still at this in a pre-release version, so we're still in the draft of the archive standard, which I'll come on to and explain where we are in that process once we've finished talking about the CDS. So that was to answer you, Masuma, online. So any further questions? Very happy to take them. That's why we're here, to try and give people access to what we're talking about. Now, as a sort of little piece of information, when we go back up to this and use the numbers becoming letters, that decision was made some time ago, but I actually implemented it this morning. So, you know, editing is an ongoing process, but I do need people to proofread and check whether it will work with their sites. So to give you an example of that, what I have is this, which is a hypothetical example showing 5 buildings through, well, 4 buildings through time, and their aggregation into a larger thing, a larger grouping, a group. So we have a thing called Darcy's Store, a spread equal bar, which was turned into a hotel, which was then turned into a house, to the 1000, 2003, and 2004 are the same building, but its use has evolved through time. Darcy's Store was there before the spread equal bar was built. And then 1005 is the accumulation of all of that being used to show continuity of the use of this particular space for trade. So we've called it, so we've developed an extra thesauri term called an exchange node. So we had a shop, we had a public house, a bar, we had a hotel, and now it's a dwelling. And it's we have this concept that those have been brought together through time. We've seen this place in the landscape used as a place for exchanges to happen. So this is the way that we think we should record archaeological sites in the future. And so that's a hypothetical example. I'll get rid of that. And I have, if I can find it. Gosh, isn't it amazing once you start looking for things, how difficult it is to find them? There we go. So this is a real example called from Romsey Abbey in the UK, which shows there's a Roman settlement, and then there's a nunnery which has a church in it. And we're trying to, we'll build up the set of records for these. So I have all of the inventory data for these items here with all of the, so this is from the National Monuments record in the UK. And we will make a set of records like the first spreadsheet I showed you to represent all of these different combinations of objects in different groupings that occupy roughly the same place in the landscape. So what I'm after is some examples of complex sites which would be which are currently recorded as single entries in an inventory, whether it's regional or national, I don't care, which would be better suited to this kind of breakdown into individual component parts. So we can see here that the nunnery started out in the Middle Saxon period and became a Benedictine nunnery, and in the late Saxon period, and then in the medieval period continued. So we see a whole range of different functions in different periods of time that we can identify and say, well, this is the set of things which were used together in the medieval period, and a different set of things were used in the late Saxon period. So the idea is to find examples of this, which aren't just examples that I've managed to pull out of the National Record in the UK. So what I'm looking for is people to supply things that we can work in this way to provide a richer pattern of information in different languages, in different recording, original recording methodologies from around the world. So I would like people to give me examples at that level. So an understanding of what's there, and then the actual records like these, which we can then use to assemble a real set of records within CDS, so that people can see how you get from a complex real piece of archaeology into the records which tell you about the whole process in Core Data Standard. So if anybody's got some pet examples, I'd be delighted to receive those. Don't all volunteer at once. And those who have already done nearly 30 years effort on this can relax. I'm not going to demand that you do it as well. Right, okay. That was the first. Absolutely, you can use it with rock art. So it's very good with rock art. With cave site sounds very interesting. Yeah. So if you can find all of the records, we can do a job at converting those and making that a set of records which would allow us to summarize the archaeology using the Core Data Standard to make it really searchable. And hopefully that would be useful as an example for you to use in deploying the Core Data Standard into your own environment. So I've done some work with Tara in Kenya on rock art, and Core Data Standard with work is, quite happily can deal with the inventory records from Tara. Tomb in Japan would be good, yes. So what I actually need is the real records and an explanation of them for me, and then we can work together to produce a worked example. Obviously, I'm not able to speak every language. In fact, I barely speak English terribly well. So now that's a good one. I like the Red Fort in Delhi because I've actually been to the Red Fort in Delhi. So there you go. So yes, so all these examples sound absolutely brilliant as long as people can actually produce the records to go with them. And then I will happily work with you to produce fully worked examples that we can put up as frequently asked questions support for the standard. And then we can get it with these new versions of letters out in the next year. That would be delightful. And obviously we'll have the first example of of the Canadian example, which I showed you, which is a figment of my imagination to start with, but we've also got the Romsey one, which is, you know, a genuine one that we can put out. It's a bit too big for it to go in the standard, which is why we have the artificial one, because that's compact. The real example for Romsey will have to go in a supporting document because it's, you know, it's proper sized real archaeology. It has lots of information. It's not going to fit on a couple of pages, so you can browse it and go, oh yeah, I see what's going on. Okay, well that sounds like that's a good place. We're about halfway through our hour, so it's probably time to switch to the other part of the material that we want to, well, that I want to cover. If other people want to cover stuff, then you need to pipe up and put it in the text chat. So this is the second piece of work that we've been looking at. To be honest, most of the effort over the last few years has gone into the Archive Standard because there's been more people who have actively wanted to participate in this, and consequently that's where the effort has gone. If you want to work on something else, you need to, you know, stand up and say, hey, I want to do something. So this is more or less the current version. There are some changes that I've made over the last couple of days. And it boils down to these basic sections. So we've got the front bit, content and forward. There's an introduction to it. And then there's a section on the selection principles, how you make the decision about what goes in the archive. The thing about archives is that it's not everything. You make decisions and you have to document those decisions on what you are going to keep and what you're going to discard. You do not keep every photograph you ever take, particularly digital imagery on site. You don't keep every scrap of modern brick that you found while you were clearing the top of a site. You make selections about what will be kept and what will be discarded. And that needs to be clearly documented. Then we've got the actual archive standard, and I'll take you through that in more detail. I'm going to drill into these sections as we go along. And then there are a set of appendices. The one that's complete at the moment is the suggested structure for the documentary archive. There are 2 or 3 other appendices which are in construction by members of the group. And then there's a bibliography of the latest and greatest. Thank you, Kanika. I will be saving a copy of this text so that I can look at these things separately. Or you can email me. I'll give you my email address at the end. Actually, I'll stick it in the text chat now while I remember. Can I type? Yay. Right. Okay. So if we drill into chapter 5, the archive standard itself, we start off by talking about the metadata that's required. So this is a minimum of the project ID when the archive was completed. It's not when the excavation happened, but when the archive or the project, the archiving project was completed, and who did the compilation. Now that could be an individual, but it's more likely to be an organization. Then we want the archive summary, which gives the background to the original project, whether it's an excavation or a field survey, and summarizes the contents of the archive. Then there's an archive inventory, how much of each type of material is there in the archive, and an index which tells you what we call storage units. And generally these are boxes, cardboard boxes, but sometimes you're going to end up with a pallet with a big lump of carving on it, and that's a place where we're going to store things. So we use a generic term of storage unit to say somewhere where you're going to put stuff. A lot of the stuff's going to go into a museum storage, and it will be in acid-free cardboard boxes, but you know, that's because it frequently is that, but it doesn't need to be. So that's why we use the term storage unit. Then we have the archive bibliography. nearly all archives will be using standard word lists and standard processes, and we want to know which word lists and processes were used in the creation of the archive. Now, if they've been published, so you can just point at them by saying it's, you know, Getty 2019, then that's great and that's all we need. However, if it's something that's homebrew to the organization that has created the archive, now, so they're your own word list, your own processes, then those need to be included with the records. Otherwise, it's completely useless. If I don't know how you created the record, how you made what your word lists actually mean, I've got no hope of being able to consume your archive in any meaningful manner. It was a waste of time putting it in the museum. So you need to include the way you have done it and the standards you've used. Then there's section 5 talks about the indexes that are required. So these are the finding aids. So if I'm looking for this thing, where do I go and find it within the set of storage units that make up the archive itself? So we describe the types of indexes that are required and how to use them. And then there are the two sections, one on the documentation of the project that's going into the documentary archive, and the second is the material that was recovered during the project and which is to be saved. So this is the material archive, the pottery and the ceramic, the other ceramics, ironwork, stonework, bone worked or otherwise, all the stuff that we're actually going to put into long-term storage. So I'll drill into each of those now as to give some more information about them. So the documentary archive, we do not talk about the documentary archive in terms of the material upon which the archive material is written or drawn or whatever. We talk about it in terms of the way, the information we need to be able to consume it afterwards. So documentary material actually breaks down into three things. Narrative material, where you can just consume it by flowing through the documentation. It might be a sound recording, it might be a video film, or it might be text that you read. But the way, if I take a piece of narrative text and reformat it, I can still get the meaning out of it. Whereas when we move to structured textual material, so tabular information, if you change the format of the table, there's a good chance that I won't be able to read it anymore. So if you've reflowed the formatting so that the thing which was originally in the third box down in the second column is now somewhere else, I have no idea how to interpret the data. So I need to know what is the structure. This element of the data needs to be in the third column across on 4 rows down. If I don't understand that, I can't read it. So if you convert that into continuous flowing text, it becomes meaningless. So I need to understand the structure as well as the content to be able to read it. And then finally, we get to visual material, where everything is about where the dots are on the page, as opposed to just some of the information being about where the dots are on the page. So all kinds of drawings, photographs, imagery, anything that's visual in nature drops into that third box. So we don't care whether you're presenting that on a sheet of permatrace or in a digital file. It's the nature of the object and how we consume it that's important to the way that it needs to be recorded in the documentary archive. So this is a change from traditional archiving standards, which talk about paper and permatrace and negatives and slides, and are all about preserving materials. We're about preserving meaning. And within that, so within each of the narrative, structured and visual material, we talk about general principles for that class of material. what you need to do about physical things and what you need to do about digital things in that class of material. And quite often, elements will be repeated between narrative, structured, and visual material. And we physically repeat them in the standard because it's much easier to look things up that if you can just read it in one section rather than go, oh, I've got to go and look up somewhere 25 pages away to find out how that works. So where there is repetition in the text, we repeat it physically in the standard so that you can go to one place and find everything you need to know to deal with narrative textual material, and a different place to go to if you want to deal with visual material without having to go backwards and forwards through the document. So that was a decision we made to make life easier. It does mean that the document is repetitive, but it's much easier to consume when you're trying to actually use it physically to go, what do I do with this? So that's one of the things that we've done. Now, the last piece is the material archive. So we talk about how you sort things, the terminology you use, how you identify the storage units that you're keeping these physical things in. And then we divided the material archive into 4 areas. What is euphemistically known as bulk finds. So things like unexciting pottery, bone, building materials, things where we're going to have, in the British term, is shed loads of it, big buckets full of this stuff that we need to manage. And we compare that with registered finds. So these are things which are individually interesting, typically, and usually made of materials where we need to be careful about our maintenance of them in our long-term storage. So metal, worked bone, jet beads, glass, things which are going to disintegrate if we just leave them in a cardboard box in the museum basement. Third category is human remains, because they have very special considerations in most legal regimes that we need to deal with. So they need to be clearly separated. And then the fourth thing is specimens. Now, specimens, let's be very clear, these are not samples. Specimens are things which are generated during post-excavation or post-survey investigation of individual items. So these are things like cross-sections that have been cut through pottery, slides that have been made with Polonon. So these are things which are the output of scientific investigation. They're not, we took a soil sample. Soil samples are either registered finds or bulk finds, depending on how you're going to treat them. Usually they're registered finds. Specimens are things which are generated during the investigation of the site, and therefore have a very different process associated with their origination and their needs for preservation and use in the future. So within each of the bolded 4, 5, 6, and 7, we have 6 sections where we talk about the methodology for handling that type of material, how you do identification, how you order things when you're packing it, packing, storage, and the indexes that you need to generate for them. Now, I've highlighted packing because we know we need something on this, and yet at the moment I have 4 blank paragraphs. So I need people to write pieces about how do I pack bulk finds, how do I pack registered finds, how do I pack human remains, at a level which can be used by anybody in any geography. So if people would like to contribute to that, I would be delighted, because that will allow me to fill in those empty paragraphs and finish something. Right. That was everything I wanted to say. So we've got perhaps 10 minutes for you to volunteer to write packing paragraphs, or to review things, or if you think there are any things that we're missing. There are other types of physical archive, so material that we need to deal with. Or if you don't like this division into narrative, structured, and visual material. Over to you. I saw your name, Trevor. I'm glad that you're pleased, because you did a lot of the starting off on that on the archive project back in the day. So I'm glad you like it. I hope I haven't disappointed you, Irina.
No, I am wondering if you include also some examples of this archive standard.
Well, what we're doing is wherever we can, wherever we suggest you need a list like this, we're giving an example of a real list from an empty one, and possibly a filled-in one from real archive material. Mm-hmm. So Duncan Brown's working on that from his experience on the European project, and he's gathering examples for us from real practice. So it's not just, you need a list. We're saying you need a list, and here's a concrete example of an empty one and a filled-in one. Because exactly, you say I need a list. What does it look like? How does it work? Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I think that, and so if you have examples of anything that you think would feed well into that process, I'd be delighted to have them. And so would Duncan, because that would mean it would be less work for him.
Stephen, can I talk?
Of course.
Great. Well, you showed a picture of the paper standard, or at least the front page of it. Is it available somewhere? Because I was checking the CIDOC pages, and yes, that one. And I couldn't find link to it.
Well, that's because the links got deaded. So it was available at one point. The latest version, which I completed an hour ago, isn't available because I've only just finished it, worked on it. What we've been doing is anybody who's interested, we place it in a repository where you can go and access it, and then we run, proper tracking on suggested edits, and then we'll release it for more general consumption and feedback next year, I think.
Okay, that's really good, because now I can introduce you to Ville Rohiola. He is in one of the boxes below there. He's a colleague of Pirjo, who wrote to you.
Right.
So he might get back to you. I hope so. He'll understand much more about these things than I do.
Well, that's brilliant. Very happy to have contact with people who want to test drive it, as it were, make comments, and contribute. Normally what we do is we just mount the latest copy, and then people can make suggestions or edits. We do track changes so we can incorporate them. But we haven't been doing this on mounted platforms. Now, what we have experimented with is using a project management package, an online project management package, to pass out tasks to people. And we've had mixed results so far, because some people like it and other people don't. But if we're going to start dividing tasks up between a much wider group, then then we can use project management software to say, you're going to do that, and this is when we can expect it. I have the project management software set up, and it's a web-based utility. Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, I know we're getting close to stopping time. We've got till about 10 past, so we've got another 5 minutes for people to volunteer to do things. I find that 5 minutes silence usually nags people into actually saying that they'll do something. God's sake, I can't sit here and look guilty for too long. Although I can't actually see that many people because obviously everybody's got their cameras off because they want to hide, so I can't point at them.
Well,
there are a few brave souls. There are a few brave souls who are being there. Ah, hello, Trevor. Long time no see. Hello, Frank. We meet on other things, I think. Right. Please, any volunteers for any part of this? Proofreading, throwing brickbats, anything, gratefully received. Just email me and I'll loop you into the shares to get at either or both documents, whichever you would prefer.
What do you plan for the next year about the standards? To finish them, to publish them in a digital form, or?
I think what we should aim for is getting them out for a wider consultation next year, and then aim for physical publication of probably a limited print run by the end of the year. So for the next conference, we would actually have physical copies to hand to people, or at least a place where they can go and get the PDF. That would be what I would hope, but there's still sufficient work for it not to be something that an individual can take on. You know, there's still things that need collaboration and people to volunteer to do stuff. Because otherwise it ends up with just 2 or 3 of us soldiering away, and it's not sufficient to make progress because real life intervenes, and you know, COVID and shit like that. So yeah, if you feel like contributing, drop me a line and I will endeavor to stitch you up with things to do. If you, even if it's just reading it and going, I don't understand that bit, we need to explain it better, that's helpful, because what we want is for this to go out and be used universally. And at the end of the process of getting the text to the point where people can understand it, then I need people to translate it. Minimum translation, French and Spanish, but I would be delighted if we could do it in other languages. We've got a nice wide range of languages for the CRM. It would be nice if we could get into a similar range to make it accessible to more people. Because we had the original core data standard, we had English and French. So, you know, now we need, it's absolutely necessary for us to have English, French, and Spanish. I think we can organize Portuguese translation. So my email's in the text chat above. I'll put it in again so you can find it more easily. So yeah, I think the Brazilian community will go for a Portuguese translation, which would be good. Perhaps something in German would be helpful. If we've got English, French, German, and Portuguese, then we can get to quite Africa and some parts of the Far East, and Chinese or Japanese translations would be really gratefully gratefully received. The CRM got translated into Chinese a couple of years ago, and that was a massive effort, but it really worthwhile, because it opened up the opportunity for a huge number of people to start to engage. So I'd be delighted if that happened. I know there's an awful lot of Chinese museums with archaeology collections and regional inventories from the visit we did to China a few years ago.
Stefan, unfortunately, I have to end.
Yeah. We're going to get the plug pulled. So thank you very much for your time and volunteering examples. I'm just going to try and capture that to my computer so that it doesn't get lost. Oh no, that wasn't what I meant to do. How do I do that? Save chat, that's the one. Okay, so thank you for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.